None of what I'm about to share is truly original. These aren't new ideas or even my ideas. One of the perks of being in my role is that I get to talk to a lot of startups and founders of startups who are, trying to sell to their first 100 or so customers, and they get asked for security-related due diligences and so on and so forth. And I also, in my role, get to talk to folks who are in, security leadership positions and GRC positions on the other side, and understand their perspective of what they're looking for when they are running due diligence or, evaluating startups on whether they are safe enough to work with. So I kind of get perspective of both sides. And what I'm about to share here is what I've actually synthesized from all of these kind of experiences. These are not something that are just ideas in the laboratory of the mind. These are real ideas that I've seen work, and I've just seen some common patterns that I see work more often than not. And I thought it'd be useful to share. So the reason I'm doing this is I think these are worthwhile. They work, and hopefully they are useful to you all. Right. So my main goal for the next few minutes is to help us arrive for a mental model, a framework of how do we think about building trust with your prospective customers. This is especially useful if you're a young startup and don't necessarily have a name or a brand. And there are questions around these sort which may not be direct, but there are implicit or indirect questions that you'll get about this sort. And my main goal over here is to be able to give you a structured way of thinking about this, rather than just doing whatever you get asked for and sort of get sent on a rabbit goose chase. So the idea is that hopefully you'll get something that's actionable, something that you can implement right this quarter, this month, this week, today. And there are small bits and pieces here that I've seen can give you a lot of leverage, especially a lot of early customers that you get as any startup, not just a cyber startup. There's a lot of hustle involved, and if you have some method to the madness, you can put this whole thing to work a little bit better. So the first thing I think we got to establish is that this is what are you really up against as a young cyber company. More often than not, you are a no-name company, and you need to build trust for yourself. And funnily, you are actually selling a tool that potentially helps your customers improve their security, but that also implicitly means that you likely have access to fairly sensitive stuff on your customers' environment, and there are going to be natural questions about how you're going to keep these things safe. And the sort of the threshold and the bar for the questions that they'll ask you will likely be higher than the bar for the questions that they might ask for any other vendor that they might actually pick. So you need to be cognizant of that. And these things get more and more accentuated simply because of the fact that you yourself are a cyber startup. You're early, so you don't actually have anything to stand by to say that, hey, there are whatever thousands of customers using us already, and that stands as a proxy of trust. Or especially when you're selling to enterprises, which might be in spaces which are either regulated or they are just large, where they have too much to lose. So that's fundamentally what we are trying to combat here. And if you getting questions like this in your sales conversations, these are all sort of proxies for, there is a bit of a trust deficit. There's something that you need to plug, and there's a gap that you need to fix in order that customers can actually evaluate you for the strength of your product and what it does, rather than worry about, hey, are you guys going to be around tomorrow? Are you going to, are you going to keep my data safe, and so on and so forth. So just a quick show of hands. How many of the folks here have gotten questions that we saw on the previous screen? Like, is this fairly commonplace? Okay. And just so I understand the audience a little bit, how many of you are in a zone where you are on the route to your first 100 customers? Okay, and between 100 and 1,000 customers? Okay. The other question I wanted to ask the group is, how many of you are actually selling to fairly large enterprises, say 10,000 employees and larger? Okay, somewhat mid-marketish companies, say 1,000 to 10,000 employees. All right. Okay, that helps me get some context. So I also want to talk about what I'm not going to talk about, which is this is not something that is going to be about how do you build trust about your product itself and its features and what it does and the use cases it solves. I'm not a sales guy. I'm an engineer. I think those things will still depend on your product and your ability to solve the actual cases, the use cases that you want to solve for your customers. So this is not about that. But this is primarily about helping you level the playing field so that your product stands a chance, especially when you're up against a more established competitor. And then there is this whole thing which is you don't get fired for using IBM. So that sort of a thing. And how do you sort of counter that and make sure that your product stands the chance that it deserves? So I think the main thing to understand in this entire equation is that enterprises are extremely risk averse. And I learned this especially better when I speak with security and GRC leaders in some of the larger companies and understand their perspective. They have a lot to lose. And everything downstream that you see in terms of how they run their due diligence and how they pick their vendors is all downstream from there. They want to work with vendors who are formidable. And there is an interesting word. This is not the word that I picked, but a CISO actually used this word. So they like to work with vendors who are formidable. And when I asked, what does that really mean? It means that these folks are going to be around. They actually take the fact that they're working with a large company seriously. They're going to take adequate measures to make sure that my data that's on your servers is going to be safe, or my data that's running through your code is going to be safe. And you take this as seriously as we would internally take it. And they need some proof points around this. So that's what that's the most important idea to internalize, and then everything falls into place. And if we understand this, then there's exactly one idea I have in the entire presentation, and that is to say that you got to treat trust as just any other feature or use case that you solve in your product. And that has a few interesting implications, right? Because I'm sure most of the founders here who are building cyber products have some arc in their mind. The product is in a certain state today, but they have an arc in the mind about where the product will eventually be. There are features that they want to add. They're learning about these things from their customers, and they're adding those features to their product. And you are sort of while you know that your product may not be completely ready today, there's a place in there is a place where the product will be in the future, and you're building towards it, and you're taking feedback from your customers and building towards it. I think the fundamental idea that I have to propose is that you got to treat trust as exactly the same way. It is, you need to think ahead of the curve. You need to generate proof points and artifacts that help you establish this. Your product isn't vaporware. So, just like every other feature, it is there. People can touch and feel it. You should be able to do that with your security program and be able to develop trust around it. And you need to have a past, present, and future of it. Like, there is a plan, there is a security program that you today have. There are things that you're working on right now, and there are things that you're going to work in the future. And you should be able to demonstrate this to your stakeholders on the other side. And I think that's the fundamental idea. When you start thinking about this as any other product feature, it also means that you don't sort of field questions about this in the on the back foot. I've often seen that, and I've been guilty of this myself, where this used to be one of those things that I hoped I didn't get asked about, because then it goes into this black hole that I don't know how to get about. We keep talking, there's a lot of back and forth, but we don't seem to be really communicating. So the way to think about this is, if this were a feature, then I'd proudly show it. I'd sort of take this on the front foot. There'll be a slide where I'd like to talk about this very enthusiastically, very excitedly. I would paint the picture of where it is today, what we have in the works. I have a roadmap for it, where I want to take it tomorrow. And this is the way I treat it. And that completely flips the way you need to look at this. Rather than being defensive about it, you're actually proactive about it. You're finding opportunities to show that your security program is one of the best. And I've seen startups really do a good job of it. And this doesn't necessarily have to be expensive or cost you a lot of time or money or effort as well. Right. So how do we make all of this a little bit more specific? I think I generally have a sort of a crawl, walk, run way of looking at this. I think there are fundamentally 3 levels at which you could do this, and it doesn't mean that you have to do this in that sequence, but just to get an idea of how do you even begin nibbling at this problem. Trust is so nebulous, but the first thing that you can basically start doing is to just get to some baseline point, like show and demonstrate to your stakeholders that security and privacy and trust is something that you have thought about top down. It's not just something tactical that you do in order to react when somebody asks you a question about it. And you can demonstrate that by actually presenting some sort of basic artifacts, like you have some basic security policies in place. You have some basic standardized security questionnaires. There is a ton out there. Pick your choice. There's SIG-Lite, there's Cake, there's VSA and whatnot. But basically have something ready so that people feel that you have spent some effort in this, you have done something about this beforehand, and you understand their viewpoint. You understand that they have questions about this, and you have something in place where you can actually have a conversation around. So that's baseline stuff. I can bet that you don't need to spend more than a week to at least come up with some baseline stuff over here. You go from that to basically number 2, which is, this is a little harder, but I've seen teams do this pretty well, is to start thinking about your security, your privacy program as a marketable asset. You flip your mindset to basically think like a marketeer, and fundamentally you try and create real shareable assets and artifacts about which demonstrate your vision of what your security program is and what it will be in the future. Now, this can take various forms. Like you have a sales deck, there should be a slide in there about security and what do you mean by taking security seriously? What are the things that you're doing today about it? You should ideally have a security white paper. It is not really that hard to actually write one, even if it simply means stuff about however you set up your public cloud, like and what are the various things that you have done over there, and baseline security practices that you might have already have in place. But the fact that you have documented this, the fact that you are talking about it itself is a good starting point. I come from a space where there is this increasing trend of building a public microsite called a trust center, which is where you actually proactively share your security-related documentation on your website. This is, again, a great signal because whoever's looking at you start seeing that you're not only talking about this in private conversations, but you're actually publicly sharing this. And that's a great signal, basically, for anybody looking at you. So if you can, I would highly recommend sort of getting invested in something like that and having that on your website. And I've actually seen Trust Center, funnily, not just being a way for you to field questions around your security program, but it actually helps you get new leads because there are people who come to your website and they'll submit requests to see certain private parts of your Trust Center, and that's the way you know that who's looking at your product. So that's another way to actually generate new leads as well. So that's something that I've seen. And the last one, you'll recognize that the step 1 and step 2 primarily are self-proclamations. This is stuff that you are saying about yourself, and depending on your ability to create these artifacts, they have different degrees of weight. But sooner than later, you are going to need some way of proving that you actually have a trust program that doesn't need to be reevaluated, or that's been prior evaluated by some credible third party. And this takes, again, various forms. There are standard security questionnaires. There are security compliances depending on the geography, the industry, and the size and the segment of the customers that you work with. There are fairly standard security compliances that it will help for you to get compliant with these things. It is not as hard as it used to be 3 or 4 years ago to get compliant with these things. It doesn't cost you as much. It can be a lot faster. And we've seen companies as small as just 5 employees get these done in a fairly short amount of time. The other thing, I'm sure you're already getting asked for these things, but third-party pen tests are a great way of saying that, hey, you do this proactively. You actually already have a pen test report that you can share. If there are any findings from the pen test report, please work on them. Make sure you actually fix them. I've known that really good CISOs on the other side, they would rather than seeing a clean pen test report, they'd rather see a pen test report which has some findings and your ability to actually fix those findings. That's what matters more than getting a completely clean pen test report as well. So that's number 2. There is, if you can afford it, if it's something that actually works for you, you're going to get asked for cybersecurity insurance. So if those kind of things are happening, then depending on how crucial that is, please get behind that. But these are signals which have third-party weight, as a result of which they generally carry a little bit more weight. So depending on your appetite, you might want to work on some of these things. None of this is a silver bullet. As startup founders, we understand that no matter what is prescribed, there will always be situations that you can't handle. And you need to have a strategy to navigate your sales conversations in the interim. Some of these things may not be in place. They may not be in place right now. You might need to buy some time, and so on and so forth. There are a few tactics here as well. The point is to, again, recognize that what you're really trying to do is you're establishing trust. So what I've seen some of the good teams do really well about this is, you can get some of these things, even if you don't have them now, get them written into your contractual obligations. So you work with your stakeholders and say that, look, you want a SOC 2 type 2. We all know that it takes a certain few months, but let's sign a contract today, and I'll write a contractual obligation there. Let's write a clause that we'll get it by so-and-so date. That's a great way to unblock yourself. I've seen other companies do various things like, hey, I'll get you a letter of endorsement from my auditor, a letter of engagement from my auditor. I'm serious about this. I'm already working towards this, and so on and so forth. There are more ways that you can actually, still find a way that your conversations aren't blocked by this, but you can keep moving ahead of it. I'm around. I'm happy to share more stories outside of this presentation as well. Right. So my fundamental hypothesis is that if you start looking at building trust just as any other feature in your product, and you spend as much time and effort and mind space on it, then you would basically go from these kind of questions to to a place where your sales cycles are a lot shorter. You're not sort of landing into these rabbit holes where you don't know what they're really looking for. You look more formidable and dependable, and fundamentally look more on par and level the playing field where your product actually gets to shine. It actually becomes a conversation about the use cases that you solve, the features that you have, the problems that you actually solve, rather than this becoming like a bit of a proxy conversation, or where they don't trust you enough and where they are worried about things that aren't core to the actual product, where you might be, or core to the actual functionality of your product. Yeah, and that's all I have to say to all founders, and hopefully this is useful. Thanks. Harshit.